Okay, let's start then. Welcome to Timbro. My name is Jesper Ahlgren. I'm chief economist here at Timbro. The subject of today is productivity and why it has been so slow this last couple of decades, and what can be done about it. As you know, what makes us rich is productivity. It's in the long run we need. That's the only thing that makes us grow as an economy and as a society as well, I would say. During the last decades or so, it's been slowing, and it's been slowing even further the last couple of years. So the main question now is: is this a slowdown just because of the financial crisis, or is this the new normal, so to say, that we should expect? And I think maybe the most interesting discussion among economists at the moment is regarding this productivity slowdown. Is it real? Or is it a measurement error? And if it's real, why is that, and what can be done about it? That's why I'm very happy to have two experts here to inform us a little bit more about these issues and the discussion in a European context. We have Björn Weigel, who's an investor and business developer, and with a forthcoming book on this topic, The Innovation Illusion: How so little is created by so many working so hard. Also Professor Sa, who is a professor at the Swiss Business School in Zurich and the IESE in Barcelona. He's been a consultant for several private companies, large European multinational corporations that I think you've heard of, and he's an author of several books on economics and management, translated into 11 languages, I think. 11 languages?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's coming in Persian, so...
Oh, very good. 12 languages then. So, and with that short introduction, I give the floor to Björn Weigel.
Thank you, and I must mention my co-author Fredrik Eriksson from ESIPE as well, and we write for Yale University Press, and they have been very, very helpful throughout the process. And yes, I mean, the first time I sensed that we were heading into stormy water was when I, as a junior management consultant, went into a big company for the first time. I had very high hopes. I was a political science student. I moved into the business side, and I wanted to build business. Instead, I saw something completely different than I anticipated. It was a completely politicized world. It was even more politicized than the political sector that I had chosen not to work with. And let's just say it was a far cry from what the Austrian economist Joseph Schumpeter called the capitalist innovation process to be a perennial gale of a creative destruction. It was nothing like that. So the question for today is, we're going to go into Europe, and we're going to see the difference between Europe and the US. Just to start off with, it's absolutely correct. We have been on a declining slope when it comes to GDP growth for a long time, actually, and we can trace it back almost to the 1950s. And this might not seem like a big issue, but it really is. If you have a society where you grow with 1% a year, it takes 70 years for that society to double its GDP. If you live in a society with 3% growth, it will take you 23 years to double the GDP. It's enormous difference for people. Now, why is this? Well, productivity growth, for sure, is the chief reason why Western economies are growing slower than before. And somehow, we are losing our capacity by using smarter techniques, new innovations to improve our economies. And the best way to see this, of course, is to look at total factor productivity growth, TFP. It stands for the lion part of when it comes to innovation creation and innovation development and technical progress. This is the measurement to use. Looking at labor productivity growth, it's the same thing. We are not working smarter and smarter, and we haven't done so for a very, very long time. Why is that? How can this be? I mean, everyone has a sensation that everything is moving so fast. New innovations are happening so fast. We're completely dazzled by the new technology everywhere around us. In 1964, Isaac Asimov had a vision or a completely off idea about cars with robot brains. That is no longer science fiction. Robots perform surgery today with virtually no surgeon or human surgeon around. Pundits even claim that the economy or technology behaves like Lord Voldemort, if you remember from the Harry Potter book. I have small kids at home, so I know all about Harry Potter. And artificial intelligence will soon outsmart humans. That's almost something that people in general believe. Steve Wozniak, one of Apple's founders, said that humans will be family pets and ants that get stepped on. That's, it's a senior voice on high authority. So it might come as no surprise that Americans, studies show, actually fear robots more than death. They do. But on a more serious note, how can it be? We're living in a time where more people than ever had access to information, resources, to create and innovate and build new things. It's kind of amazing that we actually experience this. It should be completely the opposite way around. So, there has been a few ideas and hypotheses about why this is. And one that is very common today is that there's something wrong with GDP data. Clearly it's not measuring development as it should be. And we certainly are not measuring things the way we should. But that's not the issue. The issue is that it has always been the case that GDP never measured everything. It measured GDP. So the question is not if we're measuring everything or not. The question is rather, has the problem been greater or smaller than before? Is it bigger today than it used to be? And swearing in the church, basically saying, I think it's the opposite. I think we actually are better today in measuring than before. I think the measurement problem is less today than it was before. The second hypothesis is that it will soon come. Productivity spurt will soon come. GDP will soon go up. Forget about all these long-term trends. Something is going to happen. We're all creating so much. Well, companies don't act like it. So there's no sign of this happening. And there's actually really no evidence to back this up. It's an idea. It's a belief. It's something we would hope for it to be. But big claims demand big evidence. And we have to see it to believe it. I don't believe it. And then there's, let's say, the Robert Gordon side of things, saying that we're facing so huge headwinds that we will never see productivity growth as we did before. And we haven't invented it all, but we have invented all the big things like indoor plumbing and heating and cooling and so on. And we went from taking a horseback to taking an airplane. So we cannot expect any of this to happen again. I don't think that's true. I think that's not the answer. The answer lies within, there's something wrong in the way we think about capitalism and innovation. And it has nothing to do with the innovations themselves. Explaining poor productivity growth is not just an issue about falling contributions from innovation and new technologies. We have to think about it in economical terms. For technology to be useful for us, it has to be diffused in society, diffused between companies and institutions. So innovation, it's not about innovation, it is about capitalism and the economic system. As an investor, I encounter virtually daily new, extraordinary, brilliant ideas from entrepreneurs. They have a very, very difficult time making it through the economy and really having an impact. So we should look there. OECD talks about the broken diffusion machine. And there are two areas that is very central for this diffusion machine. And that's business investments and research and development spending. If we do not spend on research and development, if companies don't do, and if we don't have business investments, there's no way we can have diffusion, because diffusion costs money, and you need resources to get new technologies through in the system. And business investment has been in decline. And it doesn't really matter. I'm just using this as you can see them if you want to, but everything is telling the same tale. We don't invest as before. When it comes to research and development, it's showing poor performance too, and it has been a long-term trend. So we don't invest, our businesses doesn't invest as they used to do. And research and development is showing poor performance. So, I mean, why? Is it a lack of money? No, companies never had more money than they do today. They are hoarding cash. I mean, it's amazing when you look at it. The ratio of cash to total assets for American firms went from 9.4 to 21% in 30 years, up until 2011. So, and Compassat says that we have had an annual growth rate of cash hoarding of 10% since 1995 in major US firms. So there is a tendency to blame the recession, saying that companies doesn't invest in R&D and in business and that because they don't really trust the future. Well, they didn't before either. The Great Recession that we experienced has nothing to do with the trend that we see now. It highlighted a few issues, a few problems that we have in the Western economy and capitalism, but it was not something that happened due to it. So, I mean, they don't invest, and they have all of this money, and clearly they see that there's something else that's more important than investing in the future and in new innovation. So what do the companies do? What could possibly be more important? Well, companies today are net lending money instead of net borrowing. So a corporate sector that contributes capital to the rest of the economy has completely lost faith and capacity to build and innovate. They lend money. And if you talk to people in the investment sector, especially in the pensions funds and insurance companies, all are looking for somehow this magic return from the real economy to materialize itself. And the companies do the same. So we have so much cash looking for returns right now, and they cannot find it. The second thing that companies do is they have been engaging in mergers and acquisitions. It has been high on the rise since the 80s and the 90s. That's also, people argue, a way to invest. You buy a small company and you insert the technology within your big firm, and so you invest. Well, that's not really the way the companies do it. They use it to consolidate rather than to build. And I don't have time to go into all of the details, but it's more a sign of a middle-aged economy than a progressive, innovative business sector. Just to give you an example, someone mentioned from 1997 up to 2012, they had over 8,000 delistings on the US stock markets. Almost 5,000 of them was due to M&As. So M&As is a major factor. And then the third thing that companies are doing today is that they're giving money back to shareholders. And they do it by share buybacks and dividends. And my guess is that if you looked really closely to the stock market over the last few years, one of the prime reasons for the stock market to be as high as it is share buybacks from companies. IBM, for example, spent twice the amount of its R&D on share buybacks in 2014. The Economist newspaper concluded that 38% of firms paid more in buybacks than their cash flows could support an unsustainable position. That was in 2013. So why are companies acting like this? Why is the economy working like this? Why are they not investing in the future? Why have we slowed down our capacities? And when we started to look into this, and not only because my frustration working with big companies, as I have finished to do, because there's no way to get anything done there. It is. I mean, I'm sorry. They're great. They're great. But I and Fredrik, sense that there's something else. There's something missing in the equation. And there's something preventing the economy from being pushed forward, and it must be something big. So I'm sorry for that. We say it's 4 things that really is keeping the economy back. 4 factors that have been growing, pushing corporate defensiveness to an extreme and insulating companies from change, preventing them. It's corporate managerialism, grey ownership, globalization, and the return of regulators. And I'm going to go through them very quickly. Grey capital, it's about anonymous ownership. Ownership based on known unknowns. Ownership of companies today seems to be a rather straightforward entity, but it's not. It's very, very complicated. It has been very, very complicated for natural reasons, because how the economy has developed and been more complicated. But it's also money manager capitalism, as Hyman Minsky calls it. It's we have institutionalized ownership. So what we lack is the main character of capitalism, the main figure that everything is based upon in capitalism. That's the capitalist. The capitalist is gone. And with the capitalists, I mean, not someone with a lot of money. I mean, you can end up having a lot of money for different reasons. What I mean is someone that practices visible ownership, that have some kind of entrepreneurial idea, and perform the very critical role of controlling corporate development. And why is this so important? Well, before I mention that, it's the third thing that grey capital is. That's graying hair. We're growing older, and when we grow older, we tend to invest in a different way. We like it to be more predictable, so we know we can actually get returns. So it makes capitalism complex by design. And I mean, trying to make small businesses grow, there's one thing that's completely essential, and that's alignment of interest when it comes to the owners, the boards, the managers, and the organization. If you don't have that, you never succeed. It's like you always have to work with that connection. Now, big corporations absolutely lack that connection. And many have touched upon it, and perhaps John Kenneth Galbraith did it in the most outspoken way when he said, from the standpoint of who really governs and who really... The idea is that you have managers that actually are taking the interest of the owners. And he said like this: one must imagine that the man of vigorous, lusty, and reassuringly heterosexual inclination eschews the lovely and available women by whom he is intimately surrounded in order to maximize the opportunity of other men whose existence he knows only by hearsay. So, that sums it up in a way. You have managers, and then you have owners, and you have no connection, you have no alignment of interest. You have it on paper. We have a lot of papers, we have a lot of documentations and a way trying to get around this problem, but it's still there. Secondly, grey capital turns capitalism grey as it allocates resources according to a rentier formula. Owners are looking for predictable returns. It's an impossible, you cannot have it in a free and open market, but still they do. And they manage to get it too. But capitalism was supposed to be a system for motivating and managing change. So, when corporate funding today follows a predictable playbook or a modern portfolio theory, companies become conservative. They shy market opportunities. They favor managers that are bureaucrats and not entrepreneurs. So you see where this is heading. We're having this stagnation coming. Grey capital crowds out innovations. Financializations of the economy has taken a lot of resources in talents and money out from the real economy into the financial world. Time is running out. Corporate managerialism, the second point here, is that we have, to sum it up, it's a confluence of actions, ideas, and events pushing companies today to non-entrepreneurial planning. That's borrowed from Ronald Coase, the Nobel laureate. So the appetite for creative destruction, the zeitgeist of capitalism, is displaced by this custodian culture that is very defensive about the future and protecting of its privileges. And I'm going to just mention a few examples of what has happened in the corporate sector over the last years. In the last 5 decades, Boston's Consulting Group Index of Complicitness concludes, we have seen bureaucracy on the rise with 7% over the last 5 decades annually. That's what we see. 40% of managers today spend time on writing reports, and 60% of their time is spent on coordinating meetings. We have seen external communications going up with 3,000% since the 1970s. So we're completely bombarded with external communication. People were not lazy back in the 1970s. So how come we can manage this? And so corporate managerialism makes capitalism predictable. We plan and we plan and we plan in corporations. Instead of strategizing for something new, we use performance-enhancing tools. We use imitations. We play internal politics, but we don't create and develop new innovations. And just one example. Performance imperatives, goals. In 1955, big corporation CEOs got 4 to 7 of those. 4 to 7 goals from their board, basically, saying this is what you should do. Today, in average, they get between 25 to 40. That's not business. That's doing everything. That's telling a manager you should do this and that at the same time, which is impossible. That's playing politics. Quickly, globalization. I don't have time to go into everything here. Globalization was a windfall for the economy. It was great. Inflation was brought down, productivity was unleashed, billions of people stepped into the economy, perfectly fine. But what didn't happen was that globalization shrank governments. They didn't. And in the later phases of globalization, it has rather weakened competition and adaptation and innovation for reasons that is complex. It has complexity reasons, has to do with sources of input, and it has to do with how companies in response to a complex world has moved globalization inside of companies instead of outside. So we have globalization happening in big firms, not between countries. It's something that people don't really realize today, that much of the globalization happens within big companies. Specialization became high fashion and important to master, more complexity. M&As increased, and so on. The soul and rhythm of competition have changed in the second phase of globalization. And finally, return of the regulators. Especially in Sweden, we experienced a deregulation boom, end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s. In Sweden, telecom and other sectors benefited. But the trend has changed, and economic regulation is on the rise. But also non-economic regulations, and I'm just going to give you a short idea of what I mean. This is the trend over state occupational licenses in the US. This doesn't help innovation, it doesn't help productivity. This slows everything down. And this is economic policy uncertainty in the United States. It's going up. So the return of the regulator creates uncertainty in innovation delayed. And just cutting it very short to where we are today, 2 slides to end it all. It should be firm entry and exit rates. This is a sign of how dynamic the society really is, or the economy really is. If you have a high rate of firms exiting and entering markets, then you have a high rate of diffusion, a high rate of change. That's high productivity, basically. And you see they follow suit. And this is job creation and job destruction. It's also going down. And it's not a good sign not to have job destruction, because they follow each other. So you would like to see an economy where you are doing things faster, smarter, and better. Job changes. Job will be created. Jobs will be destroyed in higher. So you would like to see this to go up, but you don't. You see a long-term trend of it going down. And this is the picture of stagnation. And we think it's the four forces we just mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we go on immediately to Jorge.
Good morning. Thank you, Björn, for your excellent presentation. Which the bottom line is that capitalism is becoming gray, productivity is slowing down, and things are becoming stagnant. Well, my friends, that's the good news. The bad news is that there are two different worlds in our Occidental world. There is the European Union, and there is the United States. And as we shall see, the difference in GDP per capita is very large. Today, the Americans have an income per capita 35%, 1/3 above us Europeans. Second, that gap has been widening, increasing since the 80s. So it's not a thing of the euro crisis and so on. Third, there are immediate causes for that, the most important of which is labor productivity per hour. We Europeans, in each hour, produce less 16% than the Americans. Then there are the causes of the causes. And I will conclude by sharing with you some thoughts why we need a strong Europe with a stronger economy. Now, during this presentation of about 20 minutes, I'm going to show you a lot of diagrams and numbers and so on. So if something is not clear, please raise your hand. If you have a long question for debate, leave it for the end. Björn will answer the difficult questions, okay? But so the nitty-picky things of the slides, please feel free, interrupt me. I'm going to compare you the European 15 with the United States. But if it was the euro, same thing. If it was Europe 28, far worse. Okay, and I can show you slides in the end after that. Okay? And I'm going to use official data, mostly from the Eurostat, the IMECO, the International Monetary Fund, etc. Now, when we go about comparing the European Union with the United States, some of you will be thinking, well, there is not one Europe. There is Sweden and Portugal. There is Luxembourg and Greece. Well, my friends, in the end, in this debate, I can show you that there is not one United States. There is Washington, D.C., and Mississippi, which has a GDP per capita only of 70% the average of the United States. In other words, there is within the United States a very large difference in GDP per capita among the states. As a matter of fact, in the end, I will show you that the difference in income per capita among the states of the United States is greater than within Europe. So we'll be comparing averages, because averages is good to synthesize information. But of course, there is variance here and here. But the variance here is greater than here. And what we're going to see is that the United States is far ahead of Europe in terms of productivity and GDP per capita. There are several causes for that. I will bring you the problem, and as a university professor, I specialize in bringing the problems and then asking the audience to come with the solutions, okay? By the way, that gentleman was taking a picture. Feel free to take any pictures you want. I gave a handout of all the slides and the pen, and also if you want something else that I show in the debate, feel free to contact me. I'll be very happy to send to you. So you have a pen, and but please feel free, okay? So let's start by seeing what's the situation. We have here the world average in GDP per capita. We have here the United States, which is about 3 times the world average. We have here Sweden. It's a constant. Sweden is almost always in between the United States and the average of the European Union, which of course includes Sweden, but I brought this to you, okay? And then we have Japan. So what is called the triad, these, and these are far above the world average in terms of income per capita. But there are great differences. If we take the average of, remember, this is all official data, okay? Anyone can go to the site of AMEC or Eurostat and get this. If we make an average of 100 for the European Union, we see that now the United States is in GDP per capita, income per capita, 36% above the European Union. And we can also see that in the 80s, the gap was 32%. So the gap has been widening. Let me also make a remark for what Björn said. I have never found anything in this life perfect, okay? GDP per capita is not a perfect measure, but it's the best measure we have. And so my question is, if we don't have electricity, why give up the candle, which gives us some light, okay? When there is a better thing, please bring it. For the moment, this gives an idea. It's not 100%. Okay. Winston Churchill used to say that perfection is spelled paralysis. Paralysis? Okay? Okay? So this is good enough. So the question is why? And we have immediate causes and we have causes of the causes. The immediate causes are 5 here. First, the productivity per hour. How much each person produces per hour. Second, the number of hours each person works. Then third, the percentage of the active population willing to work in the total population. And then the rate of employment. The rate of employment is 1 minus the rate of unemployment. If the rate of employment is 90%, unemployment is 10%. Please note that this crosses out with this. This crosses out with this. This crosses out with this, and so we are left with this divided by this with this. So the immediate causes of why we are so far behind our friends Americans are to be found here. Productivity per hour, number of hours worked, active population, and rate of employment. And Europe 15 is similar to the United States in the activity rate and is worse in everything else. GDP per hour. We are 15, the United States produces per hour more 15% than we produce. Ameco. Then they also work longer hours. They work per employee, in average, they work more 10% of hours than we do. If we combine the higher productivity per hour of the United States with the fact they work longer hours, we have that the productivity per employee, per working person, is in the United States 25% above that of Europe. But that's still the good news. Now, if we bring here the activity rate is the only variable where we Europeans are similar to the Americans. And it's indeed interesting. While basically the activity population has remained constant in Japan, the United States it has been declining, but please note that in Europe and in Sweden has been increasing. This has, of course, to do with the fact that the retirement age in Europe has been being postponed. In most European countries now, the retirement age is 65. In a lot of states in the United States, is 62. The percentage of persons over 65 which are still working in Europe is 12%. In the United States is 3%. And then we have the employment rate. As you can see, the average unemployment in Europe is 10%. Again, Sweden is between. In the United States, the unemployment is 5%. This is data from 2000. It's interesting in the following. Japan remains stable. The United States, which is here in red, decreased sharply and then increased, and Europe decreased slowly and is increasing. This has to do to the fact, which is well known, which is market labor in the United States are far more flexible than in Europe. Okay? I have some data on that I can show to you. So the bottom line of this is that if we compare Europe to the United States in activity rate, we are similar, and in everything else, productivity per hour, number of hours worked, productivity per employee, and the employment rate, we are worse. And consequently, if now we take, before we had Europe 100, states above. Now, if we take the United States GDP per capita 100, for all the years since the 80s, you can see that Europe has a great gap, and the gap has been increasing from the 80s to where it is now. Why? Why is productivity per hour so lower in Europe than the United States? And please recall that productivity per hour is spelled freedom. Because if I live in a country with a very low productivity per hour, I have to work a lot. My wife has to work a lot to make ends meet. If I live in a country or in a region with a high productivity per hour, I can choose either working harder and becoming filthy rich, or la bella vida. Okay? It's called freedom. So the key here is the productivity per hour. And we can divide this in 5 main things which have to do with the body, the heart of people, the mind of people, companies, as Björn was explaining excellently, and the system. I'm going to go through all these very quickly, and then I will conclude. Body. The body of the Americans is younger than ours, and it's more diverse. Medium age of population. Europe, about 42 years. Sweden, a little lower. The United States, 37 years. So they have more vigor. Not so much experience as we have, but more vigor, okay? Then, this has to do with immigration. We go later if you want to see, okay? Then, woman, okay? Now, there is a long struggle here if men are better than women or women are better or something. I think they are different. And they bring to the workplace different skills, which complete each other, okay? There's an old saying that if in an organization there are two people which are just equal, one is too much there, okay? So they bring different skills. And what happens in States is that the percentage of ladies which are part of the workforce is above that of Europe. And by the way, you have Sweden here again, okay? So the Americans have a younger body and have a more diverse working population. What about the heart? Okay? If there is a will, there is a way. Okay? In the heart, a very important thing is how proud you are of your culture. Because if you are extremely proud of your culture, you are optimist, you are a positive thinker, you make things happen. If you are not very proud, you are negative, you have doubts. Shall I take the risk? Shall I take the initiative? Shall I become an entrepreneur? Am I controlled by myself or by the environment? Now, this is data which is available. We don't have for other countries. But when asked, are you glad you were born here? Answer of the Americans. Our hermanos españoles naturally are almost like okay. Then we have the Swedish, okay. But then you look, okay. Is your culture superior? We don't have data for other countries, so I'm bringing what we have. And then very important, when we go to people and say, who controls your destiny? You or the others? 55% of the Americans say, I am master of my destiny. While in Europe, 55% say, I'm a cork in the middle of the ocean at the favor of the waves. Okay? Then we have the mind. In the mind, we have two main things. Let me just stick to the instruction before Jasper cuts my time, okay? And I will leave the work ethics, Max Weber, for the end if you want. Instruction. You have here a ranking done by the International Monetary Fund of the countries with more population with higher education. First is Canada, Björn, Japan, United States, Here we have our Sweden, and here we have the average of Europe. In other words, the percentage of Americans which have a higher education, college, is above half, 53%. In Europe, in average is this. And if we correlate, we associate GDP per capita with the level of instruction, the relation is extremely powerful, with zero probability of being due to chance. In other words, the richest countries in the world are those which have a more instructed population. It pays off to have people with more college education and so on in terms of economic growth. Poor countries, less instructed, richer countries, more instructed. So we leave the work ethics for later. And now let's move to companies. In companies, I would like to share with you three things. First is what this gentleman, Francis Fukuyama, very known for other books, but he wrote this book which is very interesting, and I recommend to you, called Trust. Basically said, there are some societies where there is a high level of trust. When that happens, there's a lot of transactions. Things move forward. And there are other societies where the level of trust between people and companies, the ethical behavior, is not so high. People then, before they go into a transaction, they think 3 times. When they decide to go, they hire lawyers. Then things go wrong, they spend time in court, and so on. The bottom line is that if you make a ranking of the countries where trust is higher and trust is lower, and the richest countries and the poorer countries, there is again a strong association with 0 probability of being due to chance. Here, the country which is ranked as the best is Finland. We have here Sweden in 8, and it's one of the few variables where Europe is better in terms of business ethics, better than the United States. Second thing, very important, is innovation, as Björn was saying. Cellular metabolism, bringing new cells. This is based on the World Economic Forum, okay? Look at here, this is the ranking. Best country in the world, Switzerland. Second best country in the world, the United States. Sweden, 4th. Average of the ranking of the European countries, 23rd in the world. In other words, this United States is a much more innovative society than Europe. And again, if we compare the GDP per capita with the innovation capacity of a country, the association is extremely strong. It pays off to innovate, and with a 0% chance of being due to chance. So in corporations, we have seen 2 things. Business ethics, where we are a little better than the Americans, and innovation, we are far worse than the Americans. And then there is another one, which is the quality of management. And here, my friends, let me continue with the not so good news, okay? All data show facts are our friends. In other words, I told this Björk, you have all heard about Andy Grove of Intel, okay? As you know, Americans like very much to have in top of their desks small things, see, a sentence which they stand, okay, they like very much. And Andy Grove of Intel had this: denial will not change reality, but can make it mortal. What we do not know is a great danger. What we do know, we can prepare for. So facts are our friends. So, again, there is a strong correlation between the management quality of in the different countries and the GDP per capita. And as you can see here, the United States is above all. We have a gap of not so large, 3.5%. Sweden is very good here, you see. This is based, and I can send to you if you send me an email, on a study which was fantastic in terms of care, scientific rigor, and so on. But the bottom line is that Europe is behind the United States. Indeed, all surveys indicate that. If you ask students which are the top employers in the world, 20, 17 in red are Americans, only 3 in blue are Europeans. If you ask people which are Fortune, which are the 50 most admired companies in the world, United States, this is not a PowerPoint mistake, this is like this. Europe 5, rest of the world, okay. Again, 5 best performing CEOs, studied by HBR, part on data, on results, and part on the impressions. So, they come ahead in terms of management. Now, let me, before moving on, call your attention for 5 minutes more? 5? To a few things. First, there is evidence that multinationals are better managed than small corporations, okay? Which is, of course, makes all the sense, because multinationals were not born multinationals. They became multinationals. They have more experience benefits, and they have diversity where they could try to find islands of strength to benchmark for the other departments. Second thing interesting is that the better the quality of the management of multinationals in a country, the better the quality of overall management. Third, and now getting to what Björn was saying, this gentleman wrote this book, which I highly recommend. It's very interesting. He is today the president of Procter & Gamble, and during the first decade he was a success. Then he left, then he came back. Okay? Now he came back in about 2013. And in this book he says just what Björn was saying, that there is a lot of entropy in companies, and that is terrible because the boss is the client. So they should go outside. That's why he says that CEO should stand not for chief executive officer, but chief external officer, okay? Whose primary responsibility is periodically to rethink the strategy. Should I stay in these geographical areas or leave, enter new ones? Should I leave these, enter, stay? Should I enter these, enter, stay? And then create an organization within which passes the better off test. The great test of an organization is if a division, an SBU, is better off within than outside. If someone comes with a check and says, I buy that division, means that it's able to create more value than I myself. So question, what am I doing about synergy? Okay? Now, I was a student of Drucker, Peter Drucker, which some of you might have heard. Drucker wrote 39 books. I checked this morning, okay? 39. None was the book that, what book would have Peter Drucker written if he wanted to say, multinationals, how to define their strategy and to create synergy. Pa, pa, pa. That is why I made this, which is starting with, which is a field which was started by this gentleman of Harvard, which I highly recommend his book also. So, in terms of corporations, management is better in the United States, business ethics is better in Europe, innovation, they give us 5-0, okay, in football terms. Okay? What about the system? And then I conclude. The system, we should look at basically 3 things. First, economic freedom. Okay? Now, I leave that to Jasper afterwards. Economic freedom is not a company doing what it wants. On the contrary, it's the power of the consumer. It means that in any industry, there is so much competition that I can choose among a lot of companies. In some countries, there's a lot of competition in industries. In other countries, there is not so much competition among industries. Again, the United States is far better in terms of economic freedom than Europe. And why does economic freedom promote growth? Because of what this gentleman once said in a Congress hearing. As you know, they go periodically to the Congress, and once he was asked, Mr. Greenspan, why is the United States economy so far ahead of Europe? And he said, well, there are several reasons, but the main reason is the high level of competition. When young, I hated all other fellow economists, but every single one of them made of me a better economist. What he's saying, my friends, is a famous sentence of Edmund Burke, that a competitor is a helper. A competitor brings the best out of us. If you don't have competition, okay? Second thing, transparency. Now we're looking not only to corporations, but also to the civil state, to the political system, to the state. The United States, this is done by Transparency International, which is a not-for-profit institution in Berlin. Okay? It's a corruption index. Most transparent country in the world, Denmark. We have Sweden in a very good place. United States, 16th, average of Europe here. As you know, corruption is a tax on economic development, okay? As Milton Friedman once said. So again, they are better than us. And then there is the cohesion. Cohesion we can divide in political cohesion. I know that today with Donald Trump, things are not so clear as they used to be, but basically in the United States you have two main parties, which are the Republican and the Democrats, and okay. In Europe, you have governments either in the government or supported by Trotskyists, Maoists, Stalinists. And you have far right, of course. So less political cohesion, but more economic cohesion. If we compare the distribution of income, 0 means everybody has the same income. 1 means one person in the country has all the income. You see that the United States here has more inequality of income than the European Union and then Sweden. So, concluding, we have a lot of variables which make the United States competitive. We have 2 where it's better, Europe, and we have 1 which is slightly better. These 12 variables can be summarized in 5. The 5 can be summarized in 4. And the 4 lead us to GDP per capita. To conclude, in 1 minute, Jasper, who cares? Who cares? Well, let me divide my answer, my friends, in 3 parts. Who cares for Sweden? Question. Are you the head of a lion, or are you the head of a mouse? Is Europe for Sweden, and for Luxembourg, for Belgium, and so on, a source of investments and the destination of problems, of exports, or a source of bailouts and problems? I need money, I'm bankrupt, I think it makes a difference for you. Is Europe for Sweden part of the solution or part of the problem? You are doing well. Is that because of Europe or in spite of Europe? Imagine how well, how much better you could be doing if Europe was different from what it is now? I leave this with the question. Second, for the Europeans in general, this is important because, as I mentioned to you, productivity per hour is freedom. We can select work harder and become rich or having more leisure. Otherwise, we are forced to work very hard. Then, people we cannot have a strong European social model without money. If we want to give children good schools, have better hospitals, have good pensions, we need people which are working to be extremely productive. So this is why it's important for Europe. And then finally, it's important for the world for two reasons. There are some qualities that only the rich can have. Here is the aid of the United States to the third world country, $32 billion. Europe, $9 billion. Small difference. And then people in the world tend to listen more to those who are rich and successful than to those who are poor. And if we want the world to listen to our values of freedom, trust, civility, and solidarity, we have to give a good example. So they ask us, well, okay, you have that. Where does that let you? You are poor compared to the others. And, my friends, there is no substitute for Europe. Look at the emerging powers. Democracy Index, okay? It's made by this non-for-profit institution. Most democratic country in the world, Denmark. Again, congratulations. United States, 14th. Look at these countries. Russia is the 131st democratic country in the world, okay? In a total of 150 countries. Could be yours, okay? But China or India. Then you have the Global Peace Index. Security in the societies. Iceland, okay? Japan, Sweden. Europe ranks 29th, and look our American friends. They rank in the world in terms of security 94 among 162 countries, so in the second half. And indeed, the United States has today a serious problem here, and you all know what I'm talking about, and a serious problem in terms of health. Obese population, data official. Population with eating disorders, Parkinson, cancer, so on. In other words, the United States have today serious problems here, and we have all the reasons to be afraid that sooner rather than later, these and these will influence these and these, and this will affect the economy. In other words, the emerging powers are not a substitute for Europe, and the United States might enter in some of its problems of its own. So the bottom line is we need a stronger Europe in the world. As Europe which promotes what Churchill said were its core values. But to promote these values, to give an example for people to listen to us, and to have the money to pay for the help, we cannot have a stronger Europe without a stronger economy. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, George. We passed 9, so those of you who have to leave, just please do. But we're going to continue a few minutes more if there are questions for either George or Björn. Any questions? Or Björn can come up as well. Or I
The difficult questions, please address to Björn, okay?
Yeah.
If you want to have an easy one, I'd be happy.
I can start then. What can we do then? Because you have raised the questions and pointed to the problems and showing quite convincingly that we do have a problem, and there's among productivity and so on, and it doesn't seem to go away on its own, so to say. So what would you suggest do we need to do on a corporate level and on a national level and on an international level?
Do you want to take it, or?
See, it's difficult questions.
Question,
Can
yes.
you put my slides back, please, Lucas? Okay. Given that the hour, I'm just going to focus in one thing. If you would ask me which variable I would act upon, I would say economic freedom. Okay? First, because we are so far behind the United States. Please note, we are average 41, United States is 11. Second, we know it pays off to have a country which has a lot of economic freedom. The most economic free countries in the world have the greatest GDP per capita and have the more competitive economy. If you make a ranking of the GDP per capita of countries, a ranking of economic freedom and competitiveness, the relation is very strong. Basically, this does not mean necessarily to decrease the state. For instance, Sweden has more economic freedom than Portugal. Denmark has more economic freedom than Greece. Norway, Finland has more economic freedom than Spain. Because there is one aspect which is the state, but then there is the private sector. Is it controlled, the industries, by two companies? By three? Where they have lunch together? Or there's strong competition? So, if you ask me, Jasper, which variable I would act upon, I would say I would increase economic freedom in the private sector in the European countries. So that each company every day is forced to bring its best to the consumer, which is not happening today. Okay? Give you just a quick example, and I give to Björn. Okay? In some countries that I know very well, cement, two companies. Beer, two companies. The money which comes from the European Union, in 56 projects, 51 were to help state companies. Only 5 were for private companies. Now, I end with a question, my dear friends. What were the communist countries, if not countries of state companies? What were they? What was the reaction? Yeah.
I think the first thing to do is to actually acknowledge a problem, and most people don't even think of it as a problem. And then I think it's a question about relatives. We discussed it last night. Everyone living in Sweden in the 80s and the 90s, if we had something, we could see, we had another example. What could economic freedom really, what did it really actually mean? Today, everyone in the Western world seems to live more or less in the same regulated society, and we don't see an alternative. So that's one, I think, is very important. We have a number of actions that you need to take, but that's where to start. On a very conceptual level, I think that we need to utilize more what is actually the strength in the Western world, and that's an open society. And we need to look on how to. I mean, it seems to be that we're entering a struggle of open or not an open society, and there are forces now advancing quite dramatically in the political and economical field that's actually challenging the open society. Deregulation is extremely important, but if you only discuss details of deregulation, you miss the complete picture. So you have to acknowledge the problem first, and it has been growing for decades.
Question there. I'm gonna give you the mic. I think it's.
Thank you for an interesting presentation. In view of what you have just said and shown us, what would be your piece of advice to the British next week?
Well, Björn, it's a difficult question again.
It is. No, but I have a very clear view on that. I think that it's absolutely crazy to exit the European Union, and it's not because I was working for Sweden to enter European Union in '94, but there's so many things that the European Union need to improve on, but going back is not going to improve anything. And if you take it from a business perspective, one key problem from European business side is that we still have a way to go to have an inner market that is actually functioning better than it is today. Sweden can actually have some benefits from Brexit that we're not talking too much about today. I mean, where all this head office is going to end up if they don't stay in London, for instance. But apart from that, it's going to be bad for us and for Europe as a whole, I think.
Well, my friend, I will tell you that from my point of view, if they leave, it's a disaster. A disaster. And it's a disaster because a lot of economic growth is based on values, on principles. There is an old saying that I do not care how much you know until I know how much you care. Okay? And from my point of view, Britain brings some values, the Anglo-Saxon values which you share also, which are fundamental to make things happen in Europe. And so if they leave, it will be an extremely, extremely bad thing for Europe. And let me finish my answer, since I'm not a politician and I'm not running for any political office, by telling you the following. I'm not sure, it's a question, that we can construct Europe based on geography only. Iraq is a country which is made on geography. You see the result. It's not one country, it's 3 countries. Africa was made in geography. You see the results. You have a few weeks ago I was in Luxembourg and the gentleman told me something which I think it's totally to the point. The word Schuld in German, okay, Schuld, has 2 meanings. Schuld means my fault and means debt. Now, there are some European countries, when they talk, I don't have the slightest idea of what they're talking about. And that is the greatest challenge we have to create in Europe. We need diversity, but we need to create a core of union of values. If we don't have that, we don't have a project. We have a collection of problems. Lincoln once said that if you have bricks and stones together, you have a house. But if you have bricks and stones separated, the mindset completely different, you have a ruin. Now, are we building a house or not? So, to end as I started, I think Britain is important for us, not because of the size of the market, the population and so, but because it brings values that we in Europe need. Freedom, responsibility, which is the price of freedom. You cannot have freedom without responsibility. Trust, civility, solidarity. And you cannot build in Europe in terms of geography without looking at the incomers share these values or not. Because it's a large world, my friends. Everybody has the right to its existence, but we have a right also to make our way. I don't know if I answer your question.
I think that will be a very good note to end this seminar. Big thanks to Björn and to Jorge. It's been very interesting, and I learned quite a lot, and I hope you've done as well. So a big hand for Björn and Jorge.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just